No class though next Tuesday, so don't show up on Tuesday if you won't be here. You do have the exam, so be mindful of that. The review sheet is up on Moodle, so use that. And then tomorrow we'll discuss a little bit about how to take the test, how I organize the test, and what we're looking for on the exam. So do come, and we'll also talk about content. So yes. So as a historian, largely of religion, this is one of my favorite lectures, but it's also a lot of information. So we're going to try and talk for most of the lecture, and then I'm going to, at the end of the class, we're going to use the sheet I gave you. So hold on to that and keep that handy. We're actually going to go a bit back in time, pick what we haven't talked about in a while, which is religion. The 1820s and 30s and 40s was a time of tremendous religious sort of movement in Japan. We focus mostly on political things, a bit on gender, but I want to go back and grab this thread as we move forward. So in the context of upheaval, a lot of change happening in the countryside as well as in Kyoto, the capital, or the new capital in Tokyo, people are questioning themselves, their beliefs, they're questioning those who govern them, and religion is one of the ways that they are able to sort of cope with that. So in the 1840s, a Shinto priest, Minamoto Shrine is Okayama Prefecture, he got very sick, and he even had trouble getting out of bed. He was sick for several weeks. He thought he was going to die. And he had the idea of going out, so he crawled out onto his porch, and he basically just sunbathed for several hours. And he began, in doing this, he was taking the Shinto idea of the sun goddess, right, but trying to directly commune with the sun goddess, in a sense, right, and ask for the sun's help. And this sunbathing, it cures him. And he walks away from this with some ability as a healer, and also with a new ideology, a new religious belief system. So this new belief system is called after him, Kurozomi Kyo, or the religion of Kurozomi, and it's all about the sun, worshiping the sun, but doing this with the goal of curing spiritual, emotional, and physical illness. So they're all tied together. They're all sort of, it's a very holistic approach to healing and to religion. And perhaps even more importantly for this class, he uses this platform to preach somewhat controversial tenets about society, right? That social harmony is important, and that Confucian ideology that talks about harmony is actually not very good at creating harmony in some ways. That internal harmony is also important, right? And that knowing yourself, understanding yourself are important. The most controversial ideology that he is talking about, though, is human equality, right? For him, women and men are equal, right? Class differences don't matter. Everyone's equal. So this is back in the 1840s. This is a very egalitarian ideology that he's promoting. People are attracted by this, as well as by his ability to help to heal them, to prescribe treatments for them to get better from their various illnesses. This is, although he was originally a Shinto priest, this is not at all Shinto. Shinto has no sort of direct connection with healing, those kinds of things. This is sort of magical stuff in that sense. So, and as you probably have, at this point, come to understand, there's also a lot of division and hierarchy and separation and rules in Shinto that mirror Japanese societal rules, right? And so these are all very controversial ideas. Another figure in the 1830s, a little bit before Kurozomi, is Nakayama Miki. She is a rural peasant woman living not far from Nara, and she becomes ill when she's in her 30s, and she falls into a trance that lasts for several days. Her husband tries to wake her up out of this trance, and he can't. and they keep trying to find ways to get her to step out of this trance. And eventually, she has a vision that allows her to wake up from her trance. The vision essentially is that there is a God, the parent figure, right, who is giving her a mandate to reform the world. So after this, she becomes a healer as well. She prophesizes. She travels all over the Kansai area, so from Osaka, Nara, and Kyoto, all over those areas, preaching. Oftentimes, saying things that the government doesn't approve of about how they're running things. And she also administers childbirth. So she acts as a midwife. And as you probably are aware from other classes, maybe not, childbirth has been a very important cause of mortality in women, right? And this was definitely the case in Japan before the 1900 or so, before the advent of Western medicine in particular in Japan. And so she's able to more or less raise the likelihood of a safe childbirth through her healing practices and her midwifery. Right, and so this also gets her a large following. You can imagine that the men are happy to see that their wives are alive and that their children are also born safely. So she has success at that and gains a large following from that as well. But again, the most important takeaway, I think, is that she's preaching controversial, heterodox ideas. She's talking about charity being the most important virtue, right? So being kind, being charitable, giving what you have to others, sharing. She's talking about being benevolent, and she's talking about rulers who are not doing a good job in Japan at sharing the wealth and at being benevolent to those beneath them. She's talking also about mindfulness, being aware of yourself. And this idea here is a bit simple on the slide, but reciprocity is another egalitarian idea, right? That everything goes both ways. That what you do comes back to you. And so this sect, for example, they have days where they clean the earth, right? So they just go around cleaning things for that day. And they're still around today. Around 2 million followers today do this, and they're very involved in the environmental movement in Japan. Those kinds of things. But it all begins with these ideas back in the 1830s and 40s. So she has quite a few followers before she dies, and like this sect will grow and grow and grow. But again, it's not at all Shinto or Buddhism, for that matter. The third group I want to talk about are Christians. So, the Christians in Japan, where are they? Alvin? 10 minutes ago. It's complicated because they are essentially able to sometimes incorporate Christianity into their belief system today. So they're neither monotheistic or pantheistic. They are sort of they can handle both. So good question, but it's hard to give an easy answer to. But they call themselves neither monotheistic or pantheistic. Antonio. So God the Parent is the figure who appears to her during her trance and tells her to go and save the world. And she gets a title. She becomes herself the parent on earth. That's her title, right? The parent. And she has this mandate to go and preach these ideals. It's not a Christian God. It's not a Buddhist deity or a Shinto kami. It's something that appears to her and that we don't sort of categorize as we might like to with sort of a Western idea of a monotheistic God. Questions? So the Christians, right? They were in the South, you said. But are there still in Japan any Christians left? There shouldn't be, right? There was rebellion. They were expelled. They were persecuted. They had, if you'll recall, to stamp on the image of Christ, right, to prove that they were not Christians. So Christians in Japan were stamped out. And the whole policy, if you'll recall, also, right, of keeping Christianity out was used as somewhat of a pretext, right, to send ideology through temples, right, with the the obligatory temple system of registration. So Christians in Japan should not have been anywhere, but there were a few. There were probably around 60,000 Christians, they were in hiding. So they were actually in the Goto Islands, for example, Itsukushima, etc., over here off the coast. So they had left Japan proper, and they were living in these islands in hiding for 2 centuries with no Western missionaries, thinking of Catholicism as a very ritual-centered religion with liturgies in the language, etc. That's quite a long time, right? But they were doing this. And they were living in secrecy and seclusion. People who lived on the islands knew about them, but no one in Japan proper was aware of their existence. But they still maintained their beliefs in Christianity and the rituals. Lay persons carried out the liturgy as best they could with their broken Latin. It's actually quite an interesting story. But for today, what's important is how they get back into the picture in Japan. When Japan opens to the West, missionaries, right, come as part of the flow of Europeans and Americans and Canadians into Japan. And these people hear about them, right? Word gets to them about Christianity being back in Japan, and they want to rejoin the fold, so to speak. In the meantime, they've been able to hide their religion by transforming Christian icons into Buddhist-looking icons like these. So this is an image of St. Peter, and this is Mary. If any of you know about Buddhism, this is a clear sort of transformation of Guanyin or Canon, right, the goddess of mercy. But here it's being sort of used to represent Mary. So they're doing that. When the missionaries come, they are mostly dealing with foreigners. Right? They're mostly legally able only to deal with Westerners in Japan. So they're in treaty ports where there are foreigners living, and they address them. Nagasaki is one of the treaty ports that is open to the West, and so the the Paris Foreign Missionary Society establishes themselves. The first church that they built there is called Ora Church in 1864. The priest Bernard Petitjean, who goes there, establishes this church. Is very surprised because within a few weeks, thousands of Christians show up on the doorstep of this newly built cathedral, asking to be reintegrated into the church. They don't smell very good. They're not wearing sort of nice clothes. They've traveled very far across the sea a little bit, and their Latin is not very good. It's deteriorated beyond even what Pardon Full is not very good. So they're just shocking, I think, for this missionary who does take them in. And of course, Nagasaki is also an area under a lot of scrutiny from the government. So as soon as they arrive, the country is aware of their presence. Right. So the short story is that he gives them communion and welcomes them back to the fold and sort of asks them some questions, and they discuss things. But then the government comes and arrests them. Somewhere around 3,000 of them were in prison. Hundreds were also exiled, so sent elsewhere, far away in Japan, and some were also killed. So not a very nice reception for these Christians who came back into the fold. And just to be clear, within 4 years, the new government, this new modern government that was trying to rule the West, initially at least, they reissued the edicts that made Christianity illegal in Japan. So they reiterate the illegality of Christianity in Japan as part of the sort of new announcement of the government. Why would they do that? And this is going to take us to another part of the religious atmosphere of the time. So if we go back a little bit and think about the history of Japan over the past 1,000 years, 1,400 years or so, Buddhism and Shinto have actually become sort of merged or melded into one for most people. This is a practice called Shinbutsu Bunri. It has a lot to do with the Shinto priests feeling left out of Buddhism's rise and trying to find ways to make Buddhism and Shinto align. And over the course of a millennia, they were able to do that with great success. So people often would worship at their local temple or shrine without calling it one or the other. And usually shrines would often be built close to Buddhist temples. This is an example here where you see the Buddhist temple with the six-sided lantern here, and then here we see the gateway for the doorway to a Japanese Shinto shrine. So this is actually very common. Right? This is how people worship. This is how worship places were built and imagined for most of Japan's traditional sort of period of history. But if you'll recall, there was this line of thinking that wanted to get rid of all the Chinese thought. Does that ring a bell? Back in the late 1700s, initiated by Motoori Norinaga and carried on by a student. Anyway, you get the idea, right? So we're talking about this line of thinking that is trying to purify Japan of Chinese thought, the Chinese mind that has made Japan less like itself. So by the time that we get to the 1830s and 40s, the figures who are Mito, if you'll recall, the domain that has the cadet line of the shogun's family, they've been influenced by this line of thought quite significantly. And Satsuma as well in the south has begun to imbibe these ideas as well. And so when they take over Japan and become part of this new government, they want to apply this. But before they do that, in the 1860s, they're actually applying this policy of trying to purify Japan of Chinese thought in their own domains, their own Hans. So in the 1860s, Mito and Satsuma in particular, a policy of Haibutsu Kishaku, to abolish Buddhism and destroy the Buddha, is carried out. So we have samurai and also often Shinto priests leading popular revolt against Buddhism, trying to demolish Buddhist icons and buildings, oftentimes hurting Buddhist believers, especially Buddhist priests, and making this a big spectacle. Lots of fire as well, lots of burning things going on as well. Here we can see a Buddhist priest is crying as a samurai from Satsuma or Mito, most likely, is stoking the fires to burn these ancient Buddhist sutras, these scriptures. And we also talk about the space of Buddhism being destroyed, right? The people were being told by some of these leaders that the wealth of Buddhism was not fair, and it was being hoarded by these Buddhists. So people began to attack and tear down Buddhist structures, melt down their great bronze bells for other purposes, and those kinds of things. So before we get to the Meiji period, before we actually have a policy to create what today we call Shinto, there was this movement to suppress Buddhism very heavily. So part of the reason why we see the prohibition of Christianity in 68 is because there was this happening in the home domains of the leaders who become Japan's first sort of modern national founders. Let's talk about Ise Shrine, a shrine that wasn't really very important before, right? And will become in the Meiji period the most important shrine in Japan. How does this happen? It's part of the same process. In the Edo period and before, this was one of several shrines that the imperial family had financial ties to. The daughters of the imperial family could become the high priestess of this shrine. That kind of is it. People who lived near Ise Shrine would, in Mie Prefecture, they would go there because it was a local shrine. It was not a national anything. There was no nation to talk about. No one from Kyushu knew what Ise Shrine was, or even where it was, or cared about it. Part of the Meiji Restoration is going to try and change that, to make this shrine and all that goes along with it, a shrine to the sun goddess Amaterasu, a national shrine, the most important national shrine. So the same figures that create this new government, they create a Department of Divinity along with their various ministries in 1868. About 2 years later, they also create a hierarchy of shrines. So all shrines in Japan, shrines are all Shinto shrines. By the way, temples are Buddhist, shrines are Shinto with this new terminology. they are ranked. So there are local small shrines, there are bigger shrines for prefectures and regions, and there are also some national shrines. And then there are also some super important national shrines as well. At the same time, the government makes shrines officially government institutions, so that they get government funds to be maintained. They get the people who work in the shrines have to be approved by the government, those kinds of things. Shrines also have to register now with the government. So if you want to call it a shrine, you have to get government approval to be called a shrine. The lands, which are quite substantial of shrines, also become government property. And the government then gives that land back to shrines that rank according to their new government ranks. Right? So preferred shrines get more land than lesser ranked shrines. I won't talk about this today, but I guess what I'll say is that Issei Shrine, no one knew about it. The government helps them to pay for a campaign to distribute talismans from Issei Shrine and trying to get them into every Japanese home throughout the country. Joe?
Are the shrines like general, or are they like dedicated to specific?
Good question. So shrines typically are dedicated to a single kami. Issei Shrine is dedicated to the sun goddess, Amaterasu, but sometimes shrines will also be the place of visitation or of respite of more than one kami, but usually they have one important kami that they're dedicated to. The case for the next shrine is a bit different. This is Yasukuni Shrine. Have you ever heard before of the shrine, Yasukuni? Does that ring a bell a little bit? I've forgotten your name again. Oh, wait, I can't forget. Tell me your name again? Henry, okay, yeah. What have you heard about Yasukuni Shrine, Henry? Exactly. This is the most controversial shrine in Japan because it is, in some ways, right, because of this openly enshrining the 14 Class A war criminals of Japan's military imperial period. That makes China and Korea very angry, and I think understandably so. So this shrine begins in the Meiji period. It's not an old shrine. It's actually a new national shrine that takes shape in the Meiji period. So in 1869, Onwara Masajiro, who is from Choshu, he's one of the two founders of the modern Japanese Imperial Army, the ones who began to recruit people for this Imperial Army back in the 1860s. And now he's much older. He has several titles in the government, but anyway, he is important in that sense. He decides that the capital and the nation need a shrine for Japan's war dead, called the Shokonsha. This is not new. There are other Shokonsha in Japan, those who die in war, but they're usually small, right? And they're usually maintained by local communities. He wants a national one, right? So he establishes this in 1969. The emperor and those who are behind him make this shrine a national shrine within less than a decade, and they give it the name, I think, sort of a bit of irony, Peaceful Country, or Yasukuni Shrine. This is Japan's first national shrine to Japan's war dead, and it's the first really national shrine that was created out of nothing, right, in the modern period. So while that's happening, the government is also more and more engaged with the West. Right? The Korea Embassy has gone over to the U.S. and Western Europe and has seen so much. They're trying to negotiate the very unequal U.S. Or Western countries Japan treaties, right? These that have extraterritoriality built into them, that have the tariff inequality built into them as well. And they decide in 1973 to go back on their previous announcement that makes Christianity illegal, and to remove signs like this that prohibit Christianity. They don't legalize Christianity, but the signs go away, which is sort of a half measure that they hope will have some diplomatic positive repercussions. Antonio?
I have a question about the shrines. So when you said that they were ranking them, those were all shrines that were already built?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one will
So this one actually gets sort of promoted to the top level of shrine right away, right? So yeah, other shrines had already been around, and we'll discuss maybe if we have time how later on they begin to aggregate shrines to make the ones that are national even more important. Good question, Antonio. So thinking about this Christianity issue, right? They don't want to legalize Christianity. There's no desire to make Christianity legal. As we talked about a little while ago, if the leaders of the Meiji Restoration disapprove of Chinese thought in religion dominating Japanese religion, they're definitely against Christian thought, right? And they're against all that it represents. But they have to think about that carefully because of the West. The West, as they're traveling in the U.S. in particular, but also in Great Britain, they get a lot of flack for the treatment of Christians in Japan. Ambassadors have heard about the persecution of the Christians who showed up on the doorstep of Aoda Church in Nagasaki. They have heard about the signs, and they've heard also about the sort of history of Christianity in Japan, and they worry at the very least for the fate of their nationals from Europe and the U.S. in Japan, but even for also Japanese Christians as well. There's no condition saying, well, if you legalize Christianity, we'll change these treaties to make them more favorable to you. But it's sort of an unspoken expectation. To be a civilized country means not persecuting Christians for Western nations. Japan aspires to that. In Japan as well, there's a lot of outcry. Part of why not all of the Japanese who show up at Aoda Church are killed is the intervention of French missionaries in Yokohama who try and sort of find ways to stop this persecution and put themselves on the line for that. So that also adds more to this sort of pressure of diplomacy around Christianity. I mentioned the treaties as well. So the end result is that after 5 years, right, of having already sort of restated their policy against Christianity, the government mandates the removal of the signs making Christianity illegal without actually legalizing the religion. But the bigger picture that's happening is, again, more about Shinto, about national ideology being created. This new Department of Divinity that's been created, the Jingikan, has one major task. First, they rank all the shrines, and then that sort of sits on the table for a long time. They also lead a campaign to educate the people of Japan about Shinto and about Japan's national identity, both of which are sort of still at this point very fluid concepts. The campaign which they lead is called the Great Teaching Campaign or the Great Promulgation Campaign. This is a campaign that's really, it's all about ideology. It's all about trying to teach people in Japan what they should know about their national religion and their national identity. So they created the Great Teaching Institute, and then below that they create prefectural, great middle teaching institutes, and then they also create smaller local ones in towns and local regions. The ideologies I think that they're trying to spread is very simple. There are 3 standards of instruction. The first is to revere the kami and love the nation. Right. So right away we have Shinto and Japan in the first of these tenets. If you recall, right, the first article of the Constitution is all about the emperor, right, and the emperor is sacred, and so he, in a sense, gets to sit between the nation and the kami as the intermediary between the two, and tell Japan what to do in theory. The second is a bit broader, a bit more open to interpretation. Principle of heaven, the way of man, should be enlightened. So that's sort of a bit more vague, and as we'll see, sort of that can be termed lots of different ways. And the last one, this is a Shinto campaign, as we'll see in a second, but the last mandate is for the Japanese people to serve the emperor and maintain the will of the court. The emperor and the court don't actually speak very often. They don't come and say, you should pay your taxes, right? They don't do this. So what's happening is the emperor is being used as a symbol, right, behind which policies are being mandated, passed down, and people are being asked to comply with them, again, based on this symbol. The Great Teaching Institute was established in a Buddhist temple, in fact, Zojoji, which was one of the two major temples of the Tokugawa shogunate, of the Tokugawa family in Edo. So the choice of this location was not neutral. They chose this because it was an important, visible symbol of the shogunate, which they wanted to take over and use to propagate Shinto in the new nation. They removed all the Buddhist icons and put up Shinto icons in their places. They had to find people to go out throughout Japan and to preach this new ideology. And it was quite complicated to find people who understood what this was all about. So they had to write pamphlets, and then they had to recruit evangelists or teachers. The first and most logical teachers, of course, would be Shinto priests, because they believe in Shinto in the first place. But they also had to recruit people who could get large audiences to listen to them. So they also got Buddhist priests. I'm not sure why this says kabuki, but kabuki actors, public school teachers, some of Japan's new religion's founders also were recruited to help spread this doctrine. And we discussed the Great Teachings a second ago. It was still a bit complicated, and they had to keep simplifying it to make it simple. And so I just showed you the three most important parts that were supposed to sort of come through this teaching. A big part of this had also to do with the emperor. Who was the emperor? The emperor was not very important before this point for people in Japan. The Meiji state wanted the emperor to be the high priest of Shinto, right? So he gets that title, and he begins to visit shrines in person, making big deals about this. The emperor does right at the palace, which he often did before this happened. First of all, the emperor moves from Kyoto to the shogun's palace, right, in Edo. So from that palace, he is doing his rituals as he's always done, but now they're national events. They're in the newspaper, they're being described, they're being publicized, and then shrines throughout the country are being told to carry out the same ritual at the same time, right, and to turn towards the capital while they're carrying out these rituals. It's called worship from afar. And I think I'll also mention the Meiji emperor has to show himself in public. So the emperor before was not a public figure. He's not very well known, maybe sort of theoretically. So he actually goes on like a PR tour, right? And the government puts a lot of money and energy into showing him the people of Japan. So he travels throughout the country in a palanquin, and he appears, and he waves, and he shows himself to be a monarch in the modern sense of the term, right? People aren't sure if they're supposed to like throw rice at him, or if they're supposed to be afraid of him, or they're supposed to talk to him. They aren't sure how to handle this figure because they haven't had the infrastructure, right, in their belief systems or in their lives to know how to deal with the emperor. And I also will mention that imperial birthdays and anniversaries become big national events as well. This is an image of the imperial 25th year anniversary of the Emperor Meiji and his wife. It was a big deal. And the emperor dies. It's also a very big deal in 1912. The funeral is a national event as well. And this picture, I think, continues to show that as well. The emperor has gone from being unimportant to being very important, and not just in terms of the law, but in terms of his public persona, right, and as a symbol for the country. And we discussed Articles 1 through 7 in Section 1 of the Constitution, which make this relationship even more clear. Okay, so that's all the hard stuff. The Constitution has been promulgated. In 1891, to make sense of the Constitution, the imperial government taps a professor at the Imperial University to ask him to help explain, right, what the government is supposed to look like, what is the role of our government, and what are people supposed to sort of think and do in Japan? Like, what are our guiding principles they can be sort of drawn out of this constitution. He then writes they need a better document, a more clear moral document. And so the Meiji Emperor issues in 1890, so as before this, he issues the Imperial Educational Rescript, which was very short, and we're pretty sure that he had some help from this professor to write this document. But the professor will also write a larger 100-page document to explain this rescript. The goal of this rescript is pretty simple. It's to lay out the founding, most important morals for Japan's for Japanese citizens. This document is displayed along with the emperor's picture, and the picture of the empress as well. It has to be displayed in every Japanese public school. So the picture is framed as well as the imperial rescript, and sometimes every week, sometimes every day, depending on where you were in Japan, students had to recite the imperial rescript on education with their teachers and their professors and et cetera. And if they mistakenly pronounced a word wrong, it was very problematic. When someone who was a teacher pronounced the word wrong, he actually resigned. When schools burned down, which happens because they were made out of wood, mostly for this point in time, the faculty would go and they would try and save the image of the emperor and the rescript. So this has become a very important document in showing people in Japan how to love the emperor, etc. So what I want to do now is I want to actually for us to take out this sheet I printed for you here. It's the first 2/3 of this text. And I want everybody to stand up. So get situated so you can stand up. Yeah. If you don't have one of these sheets, you're welcome. Everybody have one? Okay. So we are going to read this text. We're going to recite this text, I should say. So with your eyes focused on the imperial couple, because they are very important to us, I'd like for us all to read this out loud, so we can just start reading now. Know ye, our subjects, our imperial ancestors have founded our empire on a basis broad and everlasting, and have deeply and firmly implanted virtue. Our subjects, ever united in loyalty and filial piety, have from generation to generation illustrated the beauty thereof. This is the glory of the fundamental character of our empire, and herein also lies the source of our education. Ye, our subjects, be filial to your parents, affectionate to your brothers and sisters, as husbands and wives be harmonious, as friends true, bear yourselves in modesty and moderation, extend your benevolence to all, pursue learning and cultivate arts, and thereby develop intellectual faculties and perfect moral powers. Therefore, advance public good and promote common interests, always respect the Constitution and observe the laws. Should emergency arise, offer yourselves courageously to the state, and thus guard and maintain the prosperity of our imperial throne, coeval with heaven and earth. Okay, thanks. Okay, you guys can sit down. So this is a text that was read in schools throughout Japan until 1945. And I think it's a pretty interesting text. So as you read that, how'd that feel? Andrew?
It reminded me of 1984.
How so?
This is like very, like, the government is all like, as long as you respect it,
Okay, so it has a clear moral suasion, moral control element to it, right? Definitely, yeah.
It felt like a
Connor?
Cooper.
Cooper.
It felt like a more intense version of like the Pledge of Allegiance. So it felt very like giving your soul to Japan, or like your educational.
Yeah, so this it seems like we're talking about a country that's very far, but we do have our own, pleasure to our country, to our nation as well, that we, many of us when we were children had to recite. That's happening in schools? No? I think it depends on where you go, yeah. You still do it, Jack? Okay. So interesting sort of parallel there, definitely. So what is the main message that you got out of this text that you just read? This can be what you read or what you felt like as you were saying it. What's the sort of the main argument that's being promoted here?
Kind of like bringing together everyone in the nation for kind of like one cause, like supporting the nation, the empire.
So all one, right? Everybody's part of the same whole, right? And this is a national whole. So no different languages, no different races. We're all one whole, going in the same direction. Yeah, I saw hands in the back. Natalie? Okay, right. So it's all about the country and your brothers and sisters, which they also talk about, right? As your national kin, so to speak. Yeah. So this is a text. You guys can please put your name on that text and then hand those back in. Don't need more paper for you guys to take away. But this text becomes, sort of the foundation for a lot of the morality that's taught in Japan. They'll publish also a morality textbook, a dokuhon, in 1905, that is going to have the same virtues, but a bit more sort of more didactic or pedagogical framework. The emperor, the imperial throne is co-eval with heaven and earth, becomes the center of attention, right? And the nation is the most important thing, right? The sacrifice yourself for your nation if there is an emergency is also very important. So all these pieces help to define Japan, modern Japan, as we go forward. And as you can imagine, right, religion, it's almost a text that is almost in some ways religious, right? The emperor and the state are almost sacred in this text and holy. So I think we're out of time, so I'm going to have to cut this short. Sorry. Names on the sheets, hand those back in, and I will see you guys tomorrow for discussion. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, just put those there. That's fine. Yes. Yeah. It means you can prepare, like you can do an outline. So you can't bring in notes, but having already written an outline, you should be able to sort of hopefully draw on the outline to write an essay that looks like.
You can't bring this up.
Yeah, you can bring it in. Yeah. Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, Elvin. So you guys have already organized that, right? Yeah, I know about that, and that's fine. So thanks, Henry. Sorry, hey, I didn't see you. So what's your name? Sorry.
I was wondering, study guide that said